The head of the Foreign Affairs of Iran will visit Moscow with his colleague, and the ministers will continue to discuss international and regional issues, including the comprehensive plan of action on the Iranian nuclear program, the situation in Syria and Transcaucasus, in the Caspian Sea. The ministers will also discuss the practical aspects of strengthening coordination of the United Nations and international platforms, including SCO and BRICS. In the run-up to the 18th meeting of the Permanent Russia-Iran Commission on Trade and Economic Cooperation, and it will be held on the 23rd and 25th April in Moscow, they will focus on a comprehensive issues of mutual trade and implementation of joint infrastructure projects on transport and energy. And on the 21st April, the minister will participate in the meeting with the leaders of Strategic Vision, Russia Islamic World, with the ambassadors of the Organization of Islamic World accredited in Moscow. During the meeting, the chairman of the group of Strategic Vision, Russia Islamic World, the head of Tatarstan, Rustam Minikhanov, will report about the results of the work of the group in 2024 and prospects of further activities in line with its next meeting under the slogan, "The experience of Russia and the countries of Islamic world in the field of youth policy, common challenges and activities." I would like to remind you that it will be held on the 15th and 16th of May in Kazan on the sidelines of International Economic Forum, Russia Islamic World, Kazan Forum 2025. This event, the Kazan Forum, will be held between 13th and 18th of May. This forum will bring together representatives of federal and regional authorities, Russian religious associations, as well as academia and business community and mass media. On the 21st of April, the minister will meet the Deputy Prime Minister of Laos, who will be in our country with a working visit. The ministers will plan the state and the prospects of overall advancement of bilateral relations, to exchange opinions on the ways to deepen the political dialogue, expand trade and economic cooperation, cultural and educational problems. And in the period between 22 and 23rd of April, our Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov will visit Uzbekistan, where he will meet the President of Uzbekistan and the Minister of Foreign Affairs, and the main focus will be rendered to further advancement of a comprehensive bilateral interaction, and following the May 2024 state visit of our President to Uzbekistan. With due account of shared views and policies, the ministers will discuss of mutual interest relevant international issues, regional security, interaction on the CIS, SCO, and Central Asia and Russia. On the agenda are also the processes of Eurasian integration with the due taking into account the status of observers of Uzbekistan in EEU. One of the important topics of negotiations will be preparations to the 80th anniversary of victory in the Great Patriotic War. The minister will visit the memorial site, Park of Victory, in Tashkent. And among key events of the program, Sergei Lavrov will address to the faculty and students of the University of World Economy and Diplomacy, to the Minister of Foreign Affairs of Uzbekistan. The visit of the Minister of Foreign Affairs of Russia is expected to boost further the range of the Russia-Uzbek relations, joint work, and the coordinating role of our foreign ministers in this area. Let us switch to the relevant international issue, the situation in Ukraine. Once again, we can state non-compliance of the Kyiv on the 30-day ceasefire to attack the energy infrastructure. As you know, and you see it from the mass media, the Kyiv regime continues to openly ignore the agreed between the President of Russia and the United States, and supported, by the way, by Zelensky, a 30-day ceasefire on attacks on energy infrastructures. Almost on a daily basis, the Ukrainian army make drones on energy infrastructure. Since they declared the so-called energy truce, about 80 attacks were, on behalf of the Kiev regime, fixed. On the night, just a few examples, on the night from the 8th and 9th April, the Ukrainian army used 8 drones to attack the Koronevsky settlement area and energy infrastructure compressor station Korenyovskaya, and which supplies gas of the export pipeline Turkish pipeline with a capacity of 31.5 billion cubic meters per year. And all the drones were intercepted. But what is important is fact, because it was a deliberate attack of the Kiev regime on the fuel and energy complex. On the 9th of April, 2 Ukrainian drones attacked a gas distribution station, Timryuk, which provides gas to the city and Port Timryuk. All drones were intercepted. On the night between 10 and 14th April, the drones broke the wires, which led to energy cuts in Belgorod, Bryansk, Zaporizhia, Kursk, and Khersonsk regions, as well as in the Krasnodar region and the LPR. And the goals of these drones were power converters, electrical substations, and this is an energy infrastructure. An overhead line in the railway station Vasurinskaya of the North Caucasian Railroad was damaged, as well as the distribution low-pressure steel pipeline, Gazprom, gas distribution, Belgorod. This is, I would like to reiterate, just a few examples. And we have already submitted all this information to the international organizations as well as to the Americans. We'll continue to do so. As for the crimes of the Kiev regime, they disseminate not only to the fuel and energy complex. The Ukrainians continue to exterminate the Russian population, not daily, but even every hour. Just a few examples. We need to cite such examples for those who believe or expect or maybe pose questions on whether what should be done to settle the situation in Ukraine. Maybe stop supporting the Kiev regime, which in its terrorist hype commits all these crimes. On the 9th of April, the munition blow claimed lives of 2 young people, 11 and 14 youngsters. The drone attacked the civilian car in Gorlovka and the residential district in Selidovo on the 10th and 14th April, injuring 2 civilians, and a woman on the 13th of April in the Alexandrova settlement. The same day, the HIMARS attacked the Kiev district of Donetsk, damaging some civilian infrastructure, including boarding school and 2 higher institutions. On the 14th of April, the drones in the settlements of Buzhevka and Giry in Zoltarovka, the Kursk region, claimed lives of 5 civilians. In the Belgorodsk region, between April 12 and 14, the Ukrainian drones killed truck driver and injuring at least 5 civilians. On the 13th of April, the Ukrainian army shelled with the NATO Vampire MLRS the residential areas of Kamenka, Dneprovskaya region, Tokmak of the Zaporozhsky region. 3 houses were destroyed. The building of administration was damaged, but there were no victims, happily. But this strike was deliberately made on civilian infrastructure. And to put it most simple, on residential areas. On the night of the 15th of April, the Ukrainian Nazis made a suicide drone attack against civilians of Kursk and its outskirts. The strikes were deliberately made on residential areas and social infrastructure. The authorities reported about 24 multiple-story buildings, 3 of them damaged. Out of 9 victims, 6 were taken to hospital and 1 elderly woman died. One of the strikes was made deliberately on the ambulance station, on all those who should render and who should help and treat the wounded. 11 ambulance cars were under this attack and were damaged. All these drones were directed without any deliberate targets. It was made deliberately. All this operation was guided. It was a deliberately and well-thought operation as a terrorist act against the medical personnel. Now I have a question to the international organizations and to the UN Secretary General, to his official representative and numerous rapporteurs, and to the UN agencies who deal, for example, with maternal issues and childhood, protection of socially unprotected people, of medical services and security of medical staff. Where are your statements? Where are your concerns, your press releases, or at least some sympathy at the briefings or press conferences? There's no reaction at all. You are badly fulfilling your duties. All these atrocities are being investigated by the Russian law enforcement authorities. In particular, the crimes against the citizens of the Kursk region. The investigative committee continues to investigate into the facts of atrocities by Ukraine and, by the way, by foreign mercenaries of the citizens of Kursk region. In particular, those who survived from the settlement Goeva reported 6 Russians were shot dead during their evacuation. Bombs were released on residential buildings. There was grand looting among Ukrainian army. There were evidences that the Nazi threatened, and this information is a very sensitive one, threatened to rape a mother in the settlement Kazachye Loknya in the eyes of her minor children. Now the circumstances of the death of the 9 citizens of Makhnovka region are being identified. There were found gunshot wounds on the corpses. One of the died was an elderly woman who was just shot in the head. This is just a small part of all the atrocities. All those who are involved in these war crimes will be identified and brought to justice. And let's switch on another tool, a staging of the Kiev regime. As you remember, over the last days, the so-called collective West raised the public outrage on the 13th of April by the Russian army, a high-precision strike with demolition rockets at a restaurant Magellan, where a meeting of Ukrainian command with participation of the Western instructors took place in Sumy city. All these Western media hyped on this poorly staged propagandistic fake on the alleged rocket attack who killed women and children. We've made several comments on this topic, but I think that this day and these things must be talked a lot about so that everyone knew about the crimes of the Kiev regime. As we've said, new facts are being revealed that confirm that it was a deliberate staging. The Ukrainian internet is being filled with memoirs on this occasion, on the military who were eliminated and dead on the 13th of April in Sumak. The local authorities unwillingly but started to recognize the truth. The mayor of Konotop, Artyom Semenyukhin, blamed the head of the Sumsk region military administration, Vladimir Artyukh, that he organized a gathering of the Ukrainian army, engaging women as a human shield. Even Zelensky henchman, the deputy of the Verkhovna Rada, Madam Bezugla, publicly required to figure out who shaped and staged this and who ordered to use the women and children as a human shield for this event to cover the military gathering. Why this happens? It's just simply because that the citizens of Ukraine, irrespective of their political views, become to understand that they were just used, that the person who promised to bring peace to them brought slaughter and extermination. He retained his power not by democratic means, but sacrificing civilians of his own country. The facts prove, and Zelensky was compelled to fire the head of the Sumsky military administration, Mr. Artyukh, de facto reaffirming the charges. The leader of the junta tried to shift the blame on this another war crime against the citizens of Ukraine. I would like to remind Mr. Zelensky, who decided to shift the blame on the head of the military administration, Mr. Artyukh, his words, his same words. He said a couple of years ago that he's not a bad guy, he's not a fool. Then he is to blame. Whether Zelensky knows what's being happening in all these dismissals, memoirs of military soldiers, the human shields, whether Antonio Guterres knows about all these events, because just the next day following the attack, and the goals and targets were legitimate, was, and I quote, alarmed by the Sunday missile attack of Russia on Suma, and he blamed our country, and I quote, on attacking civilians. And right now, when the facts are revealed, equally as the situation in Bucha, when almost in 3 years there was no chance to release the list of all those dead, allegedly dead there. Right now, when there are new facts that this was a staging, I refer to all these stories of the Kiev regime about deliberate strikes of Russia on civilian infrastructure, on the children and women, when it became obvious and clear, maybe anyone in the Secretariat of the UN can find and be courageous enough to tell the truth.
Maybe they'll find the strength to speak up about this. When the AFU attacked peaceful civilians on the Crimean Breach, in the Moscow region and the St. Petersburg, the terrorists of the Security Service Ukraine blow up Russian journalists, where the UAVs attacked the Moscow Kremlin, when the AFU punitive squad members committed genocide and mass killings in the Kursk region and buried elderly people alive in Ruskoye Porechnoye, all those European peacekeepers were silent. The UN Secretariat just remember it, they diplomatically called for peace. Now, when the gathering of militants was destroyed, everyone in unison started blaming Russia. And when they found out that the Kiev regime, it was the Kiev regime, the local Ukrainian military administration, made up this human shield to protect this gathering, everybody just lost their minds. That's how the Kiev regime tried to shield the ghouls with children, and they did it deliberately. And now all the curators and sponsors are trying to cover it up. We also noted the pathetic statements, exclamations, those screams, lamentations that this strike was conducted on Palm Sunday during a holy day for all Christians, and so on and so forth. Only now the international minority has suddenly become concerned with the situation in Ukraine, with the Orthodox Christians, with the holy sites, only with the Palm Sunday on 2025. And before that, what was happening before that? There have been thousands of cases testifying to the fact that the modern Ukrainian neo-Nazis don't have anything left, holy in them. I would like to develop on one more aspect, relations of Ukrainian Banderites with the Church. We are weekly, during our briefing, pointing attention of the public and the international organizations, and we are talking about this every day, how the neo-Nazis are damaging and desecrating temples, how they are persecuting clergymen, desecrating holy sites and remains of saints. And what about the West, which has suddenly remembered about the Palm Sunday, the holiday for all Orthodox parishioners? Did they only just feel this attack against the sentiments of religious people? No, they've just been criminally silent during all those years. The relevant human rights institutions and mechanisms are also silent. The High Commissioner's Office on Human Rights and the Special Rapporteur on Human Rights regarding freedom of religion and convictions, the ODHR and the personal representative of the current chairperson of the OSCE on fighting intolerance and discrimination are all silent. Such appeasement of Kiev neo-Nazis who are capturing Orthodox temples, who are persecuting the parishioners up to being up to physical actions against them, attacking clergymen, and this is all being ignored by the West. The Russian side is gathering facts and publishing the corresponding reports. There have been 2 such reports on the illegal actions of the Kiev regime in regards to the Ukrainian Orthodox Church and its clergymen and parishioners. This report was published by the Minister of Foreign Affairs of Russia in July 2023. And in January 2025, we had the second such report, and the links will be provided in the text version of today's briefing. The reports are available in English language. They have been shared with international organizations. I haven't seen any reaction, any true reaction of international institutions to those reports. Perhaps everyone who have only just remembered the Palm Sunday occasion could find a couple hours to familiarize themselves with those reports. They have been written precisely on the basis of facts. All those crimes of neo-Nazis will be investigated and prosecuted. The Russian courts are continuing to sentence Ukrainian neo-Nazis and mercenaries for war crimes and other types of crimes. The commander of an engineering and sapper detachment of the AFU Marine detachment, Oleg Zavaletsky, was sentenced to 24.5 years for massacring a civilian in March 2022. In absentia, we sentenced the Ukrainian citizen Todor Panovsky. In January 2019, he attacked the Consul General of Russia in Odessa by throwing 5 flares, smoke flares, and can with paint. He's been sentenced to 8 years in prison. An international search has been declared. Also, Brazilian and Finnish mercenaries fighting for the AFU have been sentenced to 7 and 14 years respectively. The Georgian legionary Georgi Goglidze was sentenced to 9 years. He has been captured in November 2023 in the territory of LPR. A militant from the 47th Separate Mechanized Brigade of the AFU, Boris Nikolenko, was sentenced to 15 years in prison. He was previously captured by the Russian forces. And during the illegal invasion in the Kursk region, he tried to scare the locals. He prevented the evacuation, opened fire upon civilians and Russian servicemen. We will continue this work on and on. And my favorite meme is the coalition of the willing, and it's another gathering in Brussels, which happened on April 10th. However, there's been no breakthrough with the coalition of the willing. Perhaps they're not as willing as they declare to be. Despite all efforts, Paris and London still can't reach unity for the support of the promoted their mindless plan of placing a multinational peacekeeping contingent in Ukraine, numbering in its midst the detachments of some NATO countries. According to information of the media, this escapade, which is wrought with a direct confrontation with Russia, is perhaps only attractive to such Russophobic countries as the Baltic states are. Some states perhaps are not even aware of what is being done by those who are in power in the countries. The majority of the coalition members perhaps doubt the realistic outcomes of this military intervention without the support of the United States, and Washington, according to their recent statements, is not really willing to get dragged into such escapades of their allies because they clearly understand what this could lead to. And now on the Rammstein format, there's been a 27th meeting of the Rammstein format in the headquarters of NATO in Brussels under the British and German chairmanship. This 27th meeting of the contact group on the defense cooperation with Ukraine in the format of Rammstein for the first time happened without the personal presence of the head of the Pentagon. Zelensky joined the meeting through video link, and there's been no new novel decisions taken. The FU's promised 21 billion euros. This number was earlier mentioned in the NATO statements. The London was active in announcing a new package of aid numbering 350 million pounds sterling, including hundreds of thousands UAVs, the radio stations, etc. In 2025, the UK is planning to spend 4.5 billion pounds to aid Kiev. Berlin is trying to catch up to them. They have shipped 30 additional missiles for Patriot missile systems this year, but Berlin is hesitant to ship the missile platforms themselves. Instead of that, they are ready to ship another Iris-T missile complexes and ship armored vehicles, tanks, munitions, etc. A total of 3 billion euros is prepared to be given to Ukraine. And where will they get the money from? Of course, from the taxpayers' pocket, who are, even without that, are oppressed by the senseless decisions of the both current and former German authorities. The German co-chairs claimed the creation of another meme in preparation, the coalition of possibilities or opportunities. And, it's like a funny joke. There is a coalition of the willing, and there is a coalition of opportunity. This time it concerns the radio combat measures. This coalition will be reuniting 11 countries to ensure the reliability of communication systems in Ukraine and separation of communications of Russian detachment and the drone protection. This gathering confirmed once again that the Europeans are ready to continue aid to the Kiev regime, but there's some kind of detachment from the process. There's some hesitancy being felt, and they are clearly unable to act without referring to the United States. They are clearly unable to act independently because they are not ready to be the singular ones responsible for the continuation of the conflict. And also, we have noted the German report regarding the significant negatives of the weapons they have supplied. The deputy military attaché with the German embassy in Kiev issued a report regarding the analysis of some significant lacks in the weapons and munitions shipped by Berlin to the AFU. Among the key problems, he mentions the difficulty in use, frequent breakdowns, difficult maintenance, the high cost and lack of munitions, lack of spare parts, etc. At the current stage, we see that not a single example of heavy equipment provided by Germany is not completely applicable, completely useful to be actively utilized during intensive combat. Such facts give us a reason to doubt Berlin's capability to be one of the most reliable suppliers of Ukraine when it comes to arms and munitions. And that's the very country that, as I already mentioned, participates in the Ramstein format, is making up new formats like the Coalition of Opportunity, is building up some defensive-offensive alliances, etc. All those doubts will only get stronger if you remember that the former head of the Ministry of Defense of Germany, Boris Pistorius, publicly lamented the deficit of their own arms stockpiles due to the incessant supplies to Kiev regime. Now, on the UK's involvement in the conflict, we noted the publication by the Times issued on April 11th, confirming the high measure of Britain's involvement in the conflict of Ukraine. It mentions that in February 22, dozens of UK servicemen were sent to Kiev to instruct the AFU militants to use anti-tank complexes supplied to London. In May 2023, after the storm shadows were given to Kiev, the British servicemen were transported in secret to Ukraine to help equip planes with those missiles and train Ukrainians to use them. After the failed counteroffensive in 2023, which was named after the then Minister of Defense of the UK, Ben Wallace, we see that this clearly testifies to the fact who was really responsible for the development of military planning and the conducting military operations of Kiev. That's another proof that, of course, we're not talking about just the Russian-Ukrainian conflict. We're talking about a hybrid war of the collective West, the NATO countries, the Western minority against our country through Ukraine. I wanted to remind everyone of the events that happened 11 years ago, because 11 years ago, on 13th February 2014, the Council of National Security of Ukraine adopted a decision on urgent measures to overcome terrorist threats and to preserve the territorial integrity of Ukraine, which was put into force the very next day by the order of the interim president Alexander Turchinov. That was the date where the notorious anti-terrorist operation began. They call it an anti-terrorist operation, but in essence, they just started the civil war on that day. The neo-Nazi regime started fighting their own compatriots, then compatriots, in Donbass, who did not accept the government of victors who have captured power, who have gained power in Kiev as a result of a bloody putsch in Kiev in February that year, and who have unceremoniously started to eradicate dissent and did the same thing as their predecessors 8 years ago. They started to eradicate all those who couldn't be called first-class citizens. Then this name, anti-terrorist operation, was used exclusively to present the Kiev regime as the victim of the situation. However, by declaring the anti-terrorist operation, Kiev decided to start a policy of state terrorism. Besides the constant shellings and bombardments of Donbass, just remember, the region was completely blockaded from the economic, financial, transport, and water standpoint. Since December 2014, the government of Ukraine stopped paying all social dues and transactions to the populations, including pensions and managing banking accounts of the population and the enterprises in the region. They disconnected water supply of cities and villages. And throughout all those years, Russia constantly tried to attract the attention of international public to that, not due to the political reasons, because Russia always supplied humanitarian assistance to the region daily. Remember how they perceived it in the West? I remember it very well. The large convoys of white trucks who started supplying everything that was helping save the civilian population in Donbass, so the food and medicine and generators to help them power the supply. And the West called it, I remember it very well, they called it an invasion. Then they tried to backtrack, but it was too late for that, because everyone finally understood that this was another fake news by the Western media. They came up with different excuses that those trucks contained tanks, munitions, even armed personnel. And this wouldn't be necessary if the Kiev regime didn't introduce the blockade that we mentioned, that was regularly mentioned, including today. Today, we are continuing to supply humanitarian aid, and we tried to attract the attention of the international community to what's happening in Donbass. We talked that the Kiev regime was massacring the ethnic Russians and other locals in the region. Yes, we call things what they are. We noted that accusing Donbass of terrorism was a complete falsification. On 31st of January 2024, this was confirmed by the International Court of Justice, which refused to accept DPR and OPR as terrorist organizations and Russia as a sponsor of terrorism. The UN, the ICJ rejected this label of terrorist organization and terrorist sponsor. This verdict disproved the main argument of Kiev, which was used to justify the war they unleashed against the peaceful population, and they confirmed that all actions of Kiev against Donbass were initially based on complete lies.
Annually, on the 14th of April, our people mourn the victims of the Ukrainian aggression. We are grateful to all those who continue today to fight with the neo-Nazi criminals who came to our land and defend people and strives for peaceful skies. All the facts, there are a lot of them, besides just examples, once again reaffirm the relevance of the special military operation to denazify, demilitarize the Ukraine and eliminate threats coming from its territory. As our leaders said, it will be implemented. By the way, we can stop on the international response. Once again, We've made it on numerous occasions, but I would like to reiterate and bring your attention that the High Commissioner of the United Nations on Human Rights behaves incompatible with his mandate. He distances himself from the impartiality principle enshrined in his mandate and by the UN General Assembly 41.148. The double standards have become the distinct feature of the work of his office. It clearly ignores systemic, flagrant human rights violations in the Western states and their allies. And the response of the UN officials are very quick in their response to false facts in the unwanted to the West states. And a striking illustration to such policy is the approaches of the Kiev regime to assess the situation, which stays beyond the High Commissioner's interests. And here we see multiple discrimination of the Russian language in all the areas. The Russian language is prohibited in all the areas of life in Ukraine, and anyone who speaks the language gets great fines, is under administrative prosecution, receives threats up to physical violence. This civil rights activist, Volker Türk, is not concerned about the situation with the freedom of speech and association in Ukraine, where political and public space was de facto cleansed from opposition parties, mass media, and public society. There is no word of condemnation on behalf of the High Commissioner in violation of the right to the religion due to the extermination war unleashed by Zelensky, the war against the Orthodox Ukrainian Church, which comes along with arson attacks and expropriation of assets. We are seeing how they attack the temples, intimidate the clergies, and warn with violence against the clergy and the parishioners. The long-standing ignorance by the UN Commission of systematic and flagrant violation of Zelensky of the fundamental human rights, the mayhem of neo-Nazism in Ukraine led to that the Kiev junta simply violates the norms of international humanitarian law. The combatants of the Ukrainian armed forces take hostages among civilians and use them as human shield, shell them, torture, kill the Russian prisoners of war and civilians. And we talk a lot about the atrocities which were revealed recently about the Ukrainian neo-Nazi against the citizens of Selidovo and DPR in the Kursk region, and all those who have seen the footages live another way. And I talked with our law enforcement authorities, and they are just thrilled and terrified by the video footage. Other territories under the Ukrainian control exemplify other dysfunctions of the office and this tool and instrument of the United Nations. Under Volker Türk, something goes wrong. It's dysfunctioning right now. I believe there will be no response from the High Commissioner to the death of the Russian journalists. And there are a lot of examples of such deaths due to the attacks of Ukraine in June 2024 and in March 2025, when they were blown in civilian cities. The High Commission also cynically ignores the state policy in the Baltic states to discriminate on national, ethnic, racial, religious, and language grounds. I would like to remind you, in these countries, under flimsy formalities, the government continues to exterminate, to expel ethnic Russians. The Russians who consider this country as their motherland, maybe someone was born there, spent the whole life, or worked for the benefit and for the well-being of the country, who had families, who raised children and grandchildren. And the last example of such denial of truth, on behalf of Olga Tsurk, this is a legislative initiative to ban the Estonian Orthodox Church under a bizarre pretext, the threat to national security. And that's how the Estonian Street Orthodox Church, under connivance of the Office of the Human Rights, such a law that extinguishes the believers, was adopted a few days ago. The bombastic declarations of the High Commissioner in his taking the office about his commitment to impartiality and independence in his activities cost nothing. If the situation prevails, it will lead to the loss of trust by the international community to the Institute of the High Commissioner and his office. And this, in its turn, weaken the international human rights cooperation. The activities of the High Commissioner should encourage dialogue and cooperation, tangible help, rather than fanning mistrust and confrontation. The situation in Moldova, we are concerned about it, especially with what is happening in Gagauzia as part of the Moldova Republic. Recently, the Moldavian authorities are trying to remove the status of autonomy. As you know, on the 25th of March, on the far-fetched pretext, its head, Evgenia Gutsul, was detained, and she is currently under home arrest. 3 days ago, on the 14th of April, the Constitutional Court of Moldavia recognized, as they said, unconstitutional Article 21 of the law on the special status of Gagauzia. And when it was adopted in 1994. It legitimized the right of the parliament to appoint the Prosecutor General of the autonomy. Now, his candidacy can be adopted by the Supreme Council of Prosecutor General in Moldova and the Prosecutor General in Chisinau. This is a politically motivated decision and was made in secret. And Comrade was not informed in advance on the upcoming meeting on this sensitive issue. Can you imagine? Another example of such Chisinau's concern about the Gagauzians was introduced of skyrocketing fines introduced on the 10th of April for receiving social benefits via Russian Pромsvязьбанк. All this hypocrisy was shown that by all those who introduced the practice live at the grants and funds of the West, and de facto are the citizens of other states. Insinuations of some certain officials in Chisinau explicitly show to level all dissident parts of Moldavia, along with Gagauzia, leaving autonomy, or just the elements of autonomy, just in culture. We won't be surprised if another step of the Moldovan administration would be restriction of electoral rights of Gagauzia, whom currently can organize municipal elections. Maybe there will be a kind of record. 90 years ago, the same ideologists introduced in Western Europe special indications for the people of the second sort. For example, there were the yellow stars of the Jews. People were squeezed down to ghettos. And you know what happened after. Then there was gas cameras instead of ghettos. And that will be the further involvements in Moldova by the administration of Moldova. We strongly condemn these totalitarian tools of the Moldovan authorities in Gagauzi, and we call on all the relevant international structures to the flagrant violation of human rights and national minorities and make Chisinau stop stifling the Gagauzian people. And all this happening in the heart of the European continent, in the part which is under protection of the Western public figures who allegedly concerned about human rights. And Estonia, on the 14th of April, Estonia adopted amendments to the law according to which the local navy are entitled to use force against foreign vessels. They can, and I quote, intercept, redirect, or other way force civilian vessels to change their direction and, if needed, to drown them. This mandate covers the maritime zone of Estonia, which includes internal waters, territorial sea, and exclusive economic zone of the country, which, according to international law, is not the territory of the littoral state. Russia strongly condemns these de facto, and let us call the things what they are, pirate ventures, because all the authority entitled to the Navy of Estonia fall beyond the international law according to the Maritime Convention 1982, which is a universal one. We see malicious decision of Thailand, which violates the letter and the spirit of international law. If such actions will be targeted against the Russian vessels, we would respond in proportion to the threats and risks coming from Estonia as a NATO state. The Russian side underlines that the Baltic Sea is the common maritime zone for all littoral states. We expect that all the countries who in actions rather than in words honor international law give an impartial assessment to provocative decision of Thailand, who puts navigation and the overall security in the Baltic region at risk. And yet from another atrocities and events in Estonia. Estonia introduced and amended constitutions in order to deprive those who live permanently in Estonia of the right to vote at municipal elections. And no one there reminds of the people there who are working in the factories, pay taxes, bring valuable contribution to the well-being of the country, who implement all their civic duties in good faith. And for this, they are deprived of their right so that they belong to another ethnicity because they are Russians. And this is racism, which is being transformed into neo-Nazism. Behind this discriminative initiative is the aspiration of the local Russophobes not to deprive the considerate part of the Russian-speaking citizens of Estonia of their legitimate rights and to manipulate and falsify the voting results. Exclusion from the voting electorates of several dozens of thousands will work in favor of the nationalist forces and reduce this level of support by the parties who traditionally support the interests of the Russian-speaking minority. It is worth mentioning that the initiators ignored the urges of the Chancellor of Justice of Estonia to study the repercussions. And why should they do so if there is this nationalist, neo-Nazi frenziness? They did not grasp her finding that there is no connection between national security and local government. Moreover, the criticism of the authors of the constitutions, Union of Lawyers of Estonia, the mayors of Tallinn and Narva, where the main part of the Russian-speaking population of this country lives, was left unnoticed. There was an order, there was a plan to pursue the Russophobia, and they pursue this plan. With its another malicious step, the Estonian authorities violate all relevant international obligations and human rights, including adopted voluntarily under the United Nations and the OSCE. We will seek the international responsible strongly condemn this racist venture. On the 9th of April, Vienna held the inauguration of BRICS on the basis of UNIDO. The Deputy Minister of Trade and Ministry participate in this meeting, as well as the Director General, Gerd Müller. BRICS representatives also participated this. This initiative was made by Russia and supported by all the members of the association. It was reflected in the Kazan Declaration of the BRICS Summit in 2024. This center will become a venue for selection and introduction of promising technologies and best practices and increasing human capacity in industry. Its tasks include international technological cooperation, search for partners, exchange of practices, rapprochement of standards, support of small and medium companies that is fully in line with the UNIDO. We expect that the work of the center shall increase interaction among the UNIDO member states and raise additional funds to help practically all the interested states. And by the way, there was a whole topic dedicated to how the West treats its human rights obligations. On the 11th of April, the Finnish Parliament adopted the law, introduces the law to buy the property, and I quote, violate territorial integrity, the sovereignty and independence of others, and jeopardizes national security of Finland, and can inadequately use their citizens to the damage of the citizens of Finland. Maybe you know this famous children film for children. How he is called? We can call Washington as a Biden city. Maybe these are Biden's ancestors, or Presidents Bush Jr., who violate territorial integrity. Maybe it's Clinton, under whom many things were done in order to violate territorial integrity. For example, Serbia can tell a lot about this. Whom are you describing? And this is a question to the Finnish Parliament. In fact, despite some evidence and evident characteristics by the Finnish citizens who were rolled in this venture, despite all the similarity of these characteristics that are compared to NATO, it's not being done. I'm talking about the list of those who threaten security of this country, and I would like to suggest them to start from the NATO states. Of course, our country and our citizens in this document are not listed, but we are all aware that amid this frenziness, anti-Russia frenziness, whom they are talking about.
I think it's obvious to everyone that the officers of the government are not shying away from segregation, discrimination, and many tried to ask a question in Finland when the law was being reviewed. There have been many contradictions, inconsistencies, discussions from the part of human rights organizations in Finland. Nothing came out of it. Nothing was taken into account. The complete absolute ignoring of the baselessness of those accusations regarding to some part of Indian citizens. Nothing could stop them from adopting this heinous document. They are pursuing an absurd but clearly desirable goal for them to damage the bilateral relations between our countries, to harm our citizens. For those lawmakers in Finland who have been indoctrinated by this Russophobia, it is paramount to support this approach, and this approach is being supported by some part of the Finnish elite. Once again, all those oppositions presented during the review of the document were stated by the Finnish nationals, and nobody listened to them, but we will take into account all those steps by the official Helsinki. Now also on one topic that unfortunately is quite permanent. During the 221st session of the Executive Council of the UNESCO, we heard the topic of protection of journalists and how the organization has been acting, or rather enacting. As you remember, we have been repeatedly stating our desire to petition the Executive Director of UNESCO, Madame Azoulay, to conduct her mandate as prescribed. A serious problem. There have been serious problems or some in this behavior, and has been pointed out by many countries. The debate surrounding this point of agenda has clearly demonstrated that there have been some contradictions between the delegations at the UNESCO regarding ensuring the security of journalists. Is clearly noticeable against the backdrop of the recent report by Madame Azoulay, where there was no place. I think they tried to save paper to mention the Russian journalists and staff of the Russian media who died as a result of actions of the Kiev regime from 2022 to 2023. And many are justly asking why there haven't been any changes since then. And the main claims, main accusations of those presenting the statements, primarily from the countries of the world majority at the UNESCO, touched upon the intransparent methodologies regarding the collection of data regarding those journalists who have perished, and the priority is still given to the data and opinions emanating from the Western NGOs. And you clearly understand you cannot expect any objective data from those NGOs. And this data should be, perhaps, collected from among the member states of UNESCO. Of course, and NGOs can take part in this process, sure, but primarily information should be provided officially by the member states and not through some paid for and clearly politically motivated NGOs such as USAID, which has been notorious in paying for fabricated reports by NGOs. To protect this methodology, which is baseless and is not supported by the majority of countries, it's clear that Russia is standing against this biased approach of Madame Azoulay, and which previously there was a clear call to condemn any crimes against media personnel. There needs to be a data bank on all information regarding those journalists who have perished as a result of unlawful actions. Also, we are clearly rejecting this methodology used by UNESCO, and this discrepancy, perhaps some opposition regarding the Executive Council deliberations, resulted in that the document in support of protection of journalists was not adopted through consensus but through voting. And this also testifies to the fact that the conscious politicization and even Ukrainization of the activity of this organization and its secretariat, and personally by the Director General leads to the undermining of the mechanisms of this platform and harms the unity and authority of these organizations and poisons the atmosphere of dialogue on commonly valuable and not privatized issues and challenges of a global agenda. We hope that the future leadership of UNESCO, who will succeed the current leadership that has clearly disgraced itself, will lead their actions according to the principles of unbiasedness, as should be expected from a UNESCO official. We are always informing you on the activities on the Second World War, and the heroes of the Red Army, and the most important battles, on the attempts of the Russophobes to tarnish the memory of Red Army, on the vandalism against the memorials, burial grounds in Europe, etc. Perhaps there could be an impression that perhaps some have this impression that Ukraine has already joined the European Union, but only this impression only true for the specific type of EU, the so-called brown EU, the EU of revanchists, of desecrators of graves, of revisionists, the glorifiers of the Third Reich, those who glorified the bloody executioners who destroyed, who killed millions of civilians in Europe. Perhaps this is the real European Union, and the Kiev regime has really joined this organization, so to say. We remember of millions of our compatriots who have died, and in a couple of days, on 19th of April, we will have a day of joint action in memory of genocide of the Soviet people by Nazis and their collaborators during the Great Patriotic War. The events will be organized in schools, universities, scientific and cultural establishment, regional and the municipal establishment. Every year the number of participants is growing, and this reflects the importance of this topic for our people. This day was not chosen randomly. On 19th of April 1943, the executive order of the Presidium of the Supreme Council of the USSR number 39 was issued on the measures of punishment for the German fascists perpetrators culpable of murder and torture of Soviet civilian population and captured Red Army servicemen, and for spies, traitors to the motherland from a number of Soviet citizens and their collaborators. The appearance of this document has become one of the first steps in recognizing that the Nazis have led a deliberate and well-spread campaign to destroy the peaceful population of the occupied territory, and that those actions should be punished. We have started a program called Without Statute of Limitations since 2021. We are informing. During this project, we are informing the populace in cooperation with the National Center of Historical Memory. We are working with the investigative committee of the Russian Federation to solidify the crimes of the fascist invaders during the Great Patriotic War as an act of genocide against the peoples of the Soviet Union. We need to apply significant efforts to continue this work in the current circumstances of our position to the West, but our like-minded individuals support us in that action. The Russian-initiated statements of Minister of Foreign Affairs of the CSTO countries on the 75th anniversary of the verdict of the International Military Tribunal in Nuremberg, it is underlined that the facts of expulsion and extermination by Nazis and their collaborators against the peaceful population of the USSR that have been delineated in the verdict should be evaluated as a genocide of the people of the Soviet Union. The similar statement was included in the final statement of the heads of the CIS countries on the occasion of the 13th year anniversary of the CIS. All those statements were sent as official documents to the ANGA. We pay priority attention to the further promotion and concretization of provisions contained within those documents. In 2023, the State Duma of the Russian Federation adopted a decision on the genocide of the peoples of the Soviet Union by Germany and its accomplices during the Great Patriotic War 1941-1945. On the 6th of April, the Federation Council approved the federal law on the commemoration of the memory of the victims of genocide of the Soviet people during the Great Patriotic War 1941-1945 and accepted and issued an statement towards the foreign parliaments of foreign states and the people of the world on the inadmissibility of falsifying the history of the Second World War and the rehabilitation of Nazism. For us, it's of paramount importance to have the recognition that the crimes committed by the Hitlerites at the territory of the Soviet Union during the Second World War could be recognized as the genocide against people of the USSR. We are conducting joint work with the CIS, international platforms. There has been a call to the peoples of the countries of the CIS and the world community on the occasion of the 80th anniversary of the victory of the Soviet people in the Second World War. And the document states that the facts of expulsions and extermination of peaceful population, according to the verdict of the Nuremberg Tribunal, should be evaluated as genocide of the people of the Soviet Union. This thesis has been converted in the CSTO declaration. We are working on to ensure that all the facts detected by the investigative committee and admitted by the court instances could be spread to the awareness of the world community in their full volume in the name of the international truth. In 1975, it's been a tragic date of the history of Cambodia. On the 17th of April of that year, the armed detachments of the Khmer Rouge captured Phnom Penh. After this, Pol Pot and his partisans started to build the so-called Democratic Kampuchea. At the end of April, 3.5 million city dwellers were forcefully relocated to rural regions where they were forced to clear jungles for new fields, build new irrigational facilities, and all those who didn't match the new political system was destroyed and exterminated. The old authorities, the national bourgeoisie, the intelligentsia, the clergymen, and Buddhist monks were exterminated. There was genocide against the national minorities, Vietnamese, and the Muslim minority of Chama. There have been mass executions, starvation, and complete lack of medical aid, and all those, according to the international evaluations, led to the deaths of around 2 million people. After the fall of the regime of Pol Pot in 1979, his partisans who have continued to dwell in the refugee camps in Thailand received attention from Washington and its allies and received financial and material aid, but also they received diplomatic support, which led to the fact that up until 1982, the Pol Pot partisans occupied the Cambodian place at the UN. After the fact, for many years, this place was delegated to the so-called coalition government of the Democratic Kampuchea, with the Khmer Rouge still playing a leading role. There's also an 80th anniversary since the establishment of diplomatic relations between the USSR and the Republic of Guatemala in 1945. This is a large, of course, this is a large amount of time, but the contacts between the countries started much earlier than that. Even in 1880, the Russian Emperor Alexander II and the Guatemalan President Justo Rufino Barrios Ayllón exchanged messages, which laid the foundation of our bilateral links. This became a stamp that could allow us to form the ties of friendship and mutual understanding and lay the foundation for multifaceted cooperation. We think that we need to continue this trend and try to increase it. We confirm our intention to develop a constructive political dialogue with Guatemala to extend the normative legal base of bilateral relations and diversification of trade, culture, links between our countries based on pragmatism, mutual respect, and equal rights. We congratulate our Guatemalan colleagues and friends with this solemn date. One more announcement to make is from May 17 to 24. There will be a 47th International Moscow Film Festival happening with participation of 57 countries. There have been 1,600 applications. Everyone understands that the International Moscow Film Festival is a worldwide event, but the number of applications exceeded the previous year by 17%. This testifies to the growing interest towards this event from among the cinematographers all around the world. The majority of applications arrive from Russia, China, Spain, France, and Iran. The program demonstrates a broad spectrum of topics that are of concern to humanity. One of the most important topics is the 80th anniversary of the victory in the Great Patriotic War. This was reflected in different programs of this festival. The festival will be opened by the military movie His Name Was Not on the List by Sergei Korotayev, together with Vladimir Mashkov, Vladislav Miller, and Alena Morilova in the leading roles. This is a historical drama on the valor, faith, and the love for the motherland, which is made after the novel by Boris Vasilyev with the same name. The International Moscow Film Festival helps establish cooperation between cinematographers all around the world and popularize the creative achievements of the Russian and foreign cinematography and further understanding of the cultural ties and between our relations between our countries. Also, on 19th of April, we celebrate the 180th anniversary since the birth of the Minister of Foreign Affairs of the Russian Empire, the Count Mikhail Muravyov. The brilliant diplomatic career of Mr. Muravyov began in May 1864, when he was appointed junior secretary within the Russian mission at Berlin. For the next 30 years, he worked in Stockholm, Stuttgart, The Hague, and Paris. At the beginning of the Russian-Turkish War in 1877-1878, the young diplomat was in the war theater, and he was one of the officers of the Red Cross. And according to the commanding officers, he reflected, he acted with the utmost respect. And since 1893 to 1897, he was ambassador plenipotentiary extraordinary in Copenhagen. On January 1st, 1987, Nicholas II appointed him as the manager of the Foreign Policy Agency, and 3 months later he was appointed Minister of Foreign Affairs. The period from 1897 through 1900 was reached with events of huge international importance. In 1898, the Russian MFA came up with the initiative to call a conference to decrease the amount of armaments in Europe. There was attempts to improve the direct contacts with Afghanistan, to reinforce Russian positions in Iran, in Turkey. He also helped increase our ties with France during his visit in 1987. I will give a direct quote from the document that was presented to Nicholas II. There was a very detailed report to His Highness the Emperor Nicholas II, submitted by Muravyov, and the Emperor made a written remark that he read the report with huge pleasure. It was underlined that the negotiations of Muravyov in the French capital were successful and helped to reinforce the mutual understanding of both countries regarding the deterrence of Germany and the UK on the European continent. Mr. Muravyov also was one of the main initiators of the Russian-Chinese Convention of 1897 regarding the rent of the Port Arthur and the Liaotung Peninsula base. There was also agreement between Russia and China regarding the railway construction in Manchuria and outside Mongolia, and also regarding the Chinese Eastern Railway towards Beijing. In 1897, we extended our links with other countries. There was official embassy to Abyssinia. The mission in Washington was transformed into an embassy. New consulates were opened in Iran and Morocco. Mr. Muravyov suddenly died on June 21st, 1900 in St. Petersburg. In the MFA documents of that time, it was pointed out that the sudden death of the minister caused deep concern and the true deploration. And this 3-year period of him presiding over the ministry was very important for the history of our country.
On the 22nd, 26th April, there will be held the first forum of young diplomats Russia-Africa. This event will bring together young diplomats from Russia and Africa to discuss the relevant issues of international cooperation. This forum will become yet another example of the concept of horizontal diplomacy implemented by the Ministry of Foreign Affairs in order to develop the network of the platforms of informal communication between young diplomats. The main topic is the diplomacy of victory, dedicated to the 80th anniversary of the Great Patriotic War. This meeting will invite foreign ministers of foreign affairs and other young people between 25 and 40 years responsible for international cooperation, economic, political, cultural, and humanitarian areas, as well as responsible for the development of our relations in the areas. The forum will comprise the participation of 60 diplomats from 40 states. The delegates will be prepared with an intense program, as well as events to fight neocolonialism, cultural and humanitarian cooperation between Russia and Africa, and sports diplomacy. The last day of forum will be, on the last day, there will be the adoption of the new members of the International Association of Young Diplomats, established upon the initiative of the Council of Young Diplomats of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs in 2017 in order to strengthen cooperation between young experts. And it comprises about 200 diplomats now. And I'm ready to answer your questions. Is International Life with us? Good afternoon. Recently, we've got information that in Germany and France, they can be reconsidered partial return to buying the international gas from Russia. And this is amid deteriorating relations with Washington. But nevertheless, there are fears that Washington can use these LNG supplies as a trump card in its trade negotiations. What are the prospects, in your opinion, to resume cooperation between the Russian Federation and EU in the energy area? Of course, this topic is being discussed a lot, but as you know, we need to assess the policy of EU, building on the specific facts. And these are steps of the EU politicists. Let us talk about what is really happening. Brussels, for many years, is engaged as an unreliable partner in energy. And if you remember, just before coup d'etat in 2014, the European Union decided to infringe the Russia's interests as the main supplier of energy resources. Let us refresh our memory. Through adopting this discriminatory law, the so-called Third Energy Package, and introduced illegitimate unilateral sanctions that directly affected our fuel and energy infrastructure. And this is just one example. Over the recent years, there have been many prime ministers and many declarations and mechanisms and associations and other officials, anti-Russia gatherings, and numerous accusations of Russia, which rendered support, energy support to Europe. Back then they agreed to supply weapons. We've heard a lot. But this is a illogical end of this frenziness was the blow of the Nord Stream, when at first it was blown up and then no one bothered to hold at least any investigation. Some countries withdrew from this investigation process, but Germany remains in it, but utters no word about this. But when Russia suggested holding under the aegis of the UN Secretary General to hold the investigation, the West banned such proposals. So in this regard, in the same line is the ignorance of the attacks of Ukraine on the Russian energy facilities during the agreed ceasefire. These are just facts, and we need to be guided by them. This is the reflection, not just the sentiments, but the root causes that govern in the Brussels bureaucracy. There is a sense that they will continue to increase their efforts and pressure on the EU members who expect Russian energy supplies. They want the damage themselves, but want to damage all those who refuse to participate in this venture. And in this context, the European Commission prepares the roadmap to implement the policy of full denial from Russia energy. There were many documents written in this regard. I think it's about the measures affecting the supplies of pipe and liquefied gas from Russia, and they harm themselves. Of course, it's quite obvious recently. The European Commission representative Anna-Kaisa Ikonen in Brussels at her briefing said that the European Union is ready to hold talks with the US and other partners in order to replace the Russian gas. This is yet another example. And these statements are not refuted. So we need to follow what we have. I think Russia has always been a reliable supplier of energy resources. Our cooperation with some European countries continues, and we can reconsider various options for energy interaction with some certain states, of course, with due account of our economic interests. As our minister said, as soon as they calm down and reconsider their ideology, maybe then we can reflect on this issue from the other perspective. Right now, we need to build on the things we have. And there are no indications that the current leaders of the EU will reconsider their position as for denial of the Russian energy resources, which lead to stagnation of the European economy and a dramatic drawdown in the level of incomes and living standards. We don't see such indications right now. As for Germany, I think it's one of the striking examples how the government managed to act against its own people amid the initiative and full refusal announced by Olaf Scholz to deny and to refuse the Russian energy. No response to the blow of the Nord Stream ill-thought closure under pretext of environmental concerns of nuclear power stations and under influence of the new round of transatlantic trade wars. A once prosperous German economy undergoes a complicated situation. Business community is leaving, it's registering in other states. There are fears of what is happening in their country. Amid this backdrop, when a year ago German journalists came to Russia to clarify whether Russia can resume supplies on the part of a Nord Stream that was not exploded, and obtained an affirmative answer, even with a time frame when we can do it, the German government warned them even to close this mass media. When someone from the mass media politicians uttered the word about resumption of energy supplies from Russia, when and if in the future this was put under pressure and labeled as Russophobia and so on and so forth. But the result is very visible. Is Lenta.ru with us? Good afternoon, Madam Zakharova. We have two questions. Recently, the Deputy Minister, Mikhail Gauzin, said on this readiness to resume negotiations with Georgia. Is there any progress in this issue? And what are practical steps from Tbilisi that Moscow is waiting for? As you know, I believe that first and foremost we need to see this interview, Mr. Galuzin, and he looks into it, but I can say that our ministry and our representatives reiterated on numerous occasions that diplomatic relations between Russia and Georgia were interrupted, as you know, not by Russia, but by Saakashvili's regime after aggression against the citizens of South Ossetia, against Russian peacekeepers and our citizens. Now, Saakashvili's regime, exactly for these things, is being harshly criticized by the public. Mr. Saakashvili is in court right now, as you know, under persecutions, but his legacy, unfortunately, remains. Last autumn, during the electoral campaign, there were some sensible and promising declarations and statements made on the need to apologize before the people of South Ossetia, apologies and promises to gain reconciliation. There is such an intent among the Georgian politicians with regard to Abkhazia. We see them as a positive example so that the relations between Georgia and South Ossetia can normalize on the basis of a deep understanding of the current realities. We are ready to comprehensively develop full-scale interactions with Georgia, and we have a great potential for that. And Georgia remains one of the key markets on many areas, for example, in wine industry, in fruit. On the other hand, Russia is a leading supplier of energy and grains to Georgia. Both our countries share a common history, culture, religion, humanitarian ties, all just this human dimension. The current leaders, understanding these close ties between our peoples, some special emotions that we share to each other, and with understanding of the need to develop a mutually beneficial relation for the benefit of two peoples. As you know, the Russian Federation, with due account of this, has recently decided to make practical steps to restore aviation between Russia and Georgia. The Georgian citizens received a visa-free regime. As for the diplomatic relations, we have to do with the terrible legacy of the man who was called as a criminal in his own country. In terms of law, not to mention about the moral aspect. The same characteristics was given to him by international institutions who investigated into the 2008 events. When it comes to the diplomatic relations, we can restore them. We can go as far as the Georgian side is ready. We have no restrictions, and we call on everyone to carefully analyze the statements and the interview made by the Deputy Foreign Minister, Mr. Galuzin. And we will see the link in the text of the briefing. And I was quoting very close to the text. And my second question. The High Representative of the EU on Foreign Affairs and Political and Security Policy, Kaja Kallas, warned the candidates from the European Union to go to Moscow on the 9th of May, and Zelensky invited the leaders of Europe to come to Kiev on this day. How can these statements influence the commemoration of these events in Russia? And who can we wait from the European leaders on the 9th of May and the day of victory? You know, their friendliness impacts themselves because they can be ridiculed at, and they are ready to do so, in terms of reincarnation of the past of their countries, so that to assert themselves at the current positions that builds upon Russophobia, anti-Russia phobias, their complicity in neoliberal values, and the overwhelming majority, the countries who were just in the recent past their colonies, the countries that obtained their statehood not long ago in terms of history, ridicule at all those who call themselves as a beautiful garden, because everyone knows the Second World War and the rule about Soviet soldiers and the USSR, the role of the Red Army and its soldiers in the victory over Nazism. And the global majority looks at it with a certain outrage on all those who pursue the values of neo-Nazis and Nazists, who glorify the criminals, the crimes committed by their ancestors in order to distort the history. And that's the first point. Secondly, this frenziness is disastrous to them themselves. The second point, we have our own vision on how to hold events in commemoration of the 80th anniversary. And I talked about initiatives today. We have like-minded states. We have tasks and objectives to restore the historical memory and to preserve it. Of course, we shall continue to eliminate the fake news, to reveal them, do whatever we can, so that to provide the maximum information. You know how archives are being revealed, how our ministry releases the reports that were known made publicly available on the fake events of that times. We have a lot of notebooks, films, documentaries that are being filmed or even restored, take into account this video footage of that times. You can see all these novels in relation that describing that times. You know, this intention paid by the public organizations in our country to the veteran associations or the captives of the camps of concentration camps, and you know that the support of the state, because that's another important aspect to preserve the historical memory. We can see how our education, school education, preschool education, higher education, reveals its doors and programs so that history can finally take a decent place despite some other areas
of high use and great use, but history is being promoted in other directions. Perhaps if you push history aside, you will be doomed to repeat the mistakes of history in other historical periods. But perhaps if you talk about the influence of what they've made up, and this will reinforce us in our position. Whether we see a signal, we see in those actions a signal that we shouldn't go back on our ideas. We shouldn't trust them again. We shouldn't do this if they promise, if we stop giving attention to our national priorities, our history, then they would shed the light to us of prosperity and well-being. We've already gone through that. We understand that it's not the case. When we give an inch to forget our history, we experience everything on the contrary. We experience a rain of attacks and the flurry of accusations. And in their frenzy regarding the Second World War, if there's any sense in that frenzy, only in reinforcing us on our own positions. And this testifies to the fact that we have chosen the correct path. Thank you very much. Thank you. Is Ria Novosti with us? Yes, good afternoon. Can you hear me? I can see you even better than I can hear you. Yes, if you allow me, Christina Rodriguez from Ria Novosti, I saw you so well that I even recognized you. Thank you, that's very good to hear. We have two questions today. The first question concerns the topic that you mentioned today regarding the protracted discussions at the UNESCO regarding the ensuring security of journalists. How is that situation with that affair in other international structures such as the OSCE? How does Moscow evaluate the first steps of the recent The international platforms have revitalized the activity on the eve of the 3rd of May, the day of the freedom of the press, and there have been many conferences and meetings dedicated to that date. Those discussions have been not only at the UNESCO but also at the OSCE. If we can call anything happening at the OSCE as discussion. The new representative organization regarding the freedom of the media, Jan Brotu, he has started off with a relevant report, and I think he had enough time to see for himself what troubled heritage he had, inheriting the situation from Teresa Ribeiro, his predecessor, who has completely broke down this process and the work in that framework, whose incompetence and the policy of double standards has resulted in tremendous efforts to be made by the new chair to restore trust towards this institution. It's like this: since the time she was appointed 4 years ago, she has paralyzed the work of the OSCE in that direction. It came to the fact that the former representative introduced a norm of a conscious ignoring of bloody crimes and terrorist attacks against journalists. And I'm talking about the crimes of the Kiev regime neo-Nazis against journalists both in Russia and Ukraine that they deemed as rogue. In the corresponding documents of the USA, the agency that was supposed to deal with international cooperation, this is called strategic silence. The predecessor of Jan Brotu, Madame Ribeiro, introduced the strategic silence to this OSCE institution. This was an entire genre of work, this inexpressive silence. Sometimes they were staying silent with in quite colorful manner, but they still stayed silent. They weren't intending to have an exchange in opinions. They weren't intent on dialogue. They weren't ready to analyze and hear the points of view to find common ground. This humanitarian basket was the goal of it was to create conditions to ensure safe work of the media officers in different tracks, including in the security track. But now, what is left of it? Where are the results? There is nothing of value. Everything that was used to criticize Russia for the things that we didn't do, like the not ensuring security of journalists, now this has been brought to be as a new normal when describing the situation in Ukraine. How can this happen? The OSCE stopped stating that the Western countries have not been applying the provisions that they subscribe to when it comes to protection of journalists, when it comes to guaranteeing the freedom of speech in practice. But they continue to parrot this idea, but in practice they're not using those instruments. In recent years, they've developed and elaborated or unveiled new or perhaps old reincarnated forms of pressure against those who don't think the same way as they do, new forms of content. They've been also applying repressions and terrorizing measures. But every time in the last 4 years, the OSCE provided an indulgence for the Western media for the acts that we have been describing. And the topic of media and media officers became, in the recent years, an instrument of political manipulations of the countries of the West within the OSCE, this Western minority of states, and an instrument of pressure against the states of the world majority, the instrument of manipulating information to serve their own short-sighted goals. So we'll have to think that in recent years there hasn't been just a complete breakdown of dialogue in this area, but the trust in the institution has been catastrophically eroded. There has been. It's not even saying that journalists haven't got more problems. It's clear that with the advent of AI, there's been more. There have been both negatives and positives. There have been a lot of armed conflicts and overwhelming numbers of journalists being killed or injured while performing their duty. But the main point for the SC has not been the number of journalists affected, but the possibility of implementing their mandate. They completely lost the aptitude for that. Madame Ribeiro fell victim to, I don't know, the conscious or unconscious pressure. Perhaps this is up to professionals to determine. But she fell victim to this Western narrow scope approach, where the Western officials ignored all agreements, declarations, and documents signed by the West only to push through some topic that they thought as preferable, the agenda of the day, as I can call it. She couldn't counter it on her own track. That's why journalists don't even have any trust left towards this institution. I'm not talking about Russian journalists, but if we listen to the representative of the media from other countries, they neither do they. They don't have any trust. They don't see any added value in this institution, and no value at all in the OSCE institutions. So, if there is a will, at least it was enunciated then, there is a way to, by improving trust, only through meticulous and how do I say it, a laudable execution of their commitments in the appointed position. I would even perhaps delineate the criteria that would be necessary to be implemented in the work of the institution of the OSCE representative on the freedom of speech. Clear, honesty, unbiased approach when carrying out their duties, without any political preferences, sympathies, antipathies. I think that's perhaps somewhere close to perhaps the code of conduct of a doctor or a teacher. Thank you. Thank you. And my second question, on the 10th of April, the head of the EU mission in Chisinau, Yanis Mazeiks, claimed that he doesn't preclude Russia's involvement in interference of Russia in the parliamentary elections in Moldova this autumn. How would you comment on that? I think this is some kind of a plague that they have been getting infected with, and before they get cured or until they develop an intellectual immunity to this plague, they will continue to spout this nonsense. If you give evaluations, it's all hypocritical. This is all lies and manipulations, double standards. This is all spreading of fake news, and this is a game for the internal audience to influence the democratic electoral processes. Let me just give an example. On one hand, Russia is accused of influencing electoral process and justice process in Moldova. We are also accused of cyber attacks, misinformation, etc., etc. However, they didn't provide any proof, no facts. Just give some proof as facts proving that we are actually doing something. There are others citing some classified information that they cannot present, or, as was told us by liberal Democrats in the US, everything is in the social media. And a couple of years later, it turned out that they hated social media even more than us, and they started to moderate them. And the interference of Brussels, on the other hand, into the internal affairs of the member states and candidate states is noteworthy, because the EU is clearly demanding the re-evaluation of the results of elections. They're not even demanding some political steps from the current authorities. They can just completely cancel the results of elections if they don't like it. And the case in point is Romania, from the same region. It's a complete shocking development, which draws criticism not only from the world majority, but even from the United States, who have claimed that they have never seen such a thing. And even in Moldova, during the elections, there have been some discrepancies, and we saw this a referendum named as such by Madam Sandu. There have been such manipulations. There have been so much discrepancies. But there's still no proof when Russia interferes, as they claim. There's no proof. But when the West is clearly interfering into the processes, there is nothing to be concerned about. They also claim that Russia is giving millions of dollars to bribe the electorate in Moldova, and when the EU is spending millions of euros to support the pro-West powers in the region, in the country, directly or indirectly, as if nobody notices anything. It's also important to see and analyze how is the financing happening, because not everything is conducted through financial support, but it also includes some measures to allegedly under the form of development aid. They're providing loans to Moldova, and this is a burden for the population. Recently, we saw a financial package from the EU amounting to 1.9 billion euros, and 1.5 billion euros out of the sum is credit and loan. And it's as if it doesn't influence the evaluation of efforts of the EU in Moldova as an interference. This is some kind of doubling system. And they claim that Russia is the main threat to the security of Moldova. And they're seriously saying that if Ukraine falls, and there's a fall in Ukraine, the Republic of Moldova will be the next one. It's truly the reflective of their policy. It's what Madam Sandu has been doing everything to make that true. And it's the EU which is doing everything in their power to turn it into an anti-Russian base in Europe. They are trying to create a logistical base to supply Kiev regime, and what they're doing in essence, they are dragging the population of the country into the conflict that is unraveling in the neighboring territories. According to the information circulating in media, Moldova is the second country after Kiev regarding the amount of aid received from EU. You see this through the European Peace Fund, which is essentially a European war fund, because it's financing the war against Russia. You see it as an example of hypocrisy of the West. Regarding the freedom of speech, Yanis Samazhaiks himself is positioning himself as a protection of the independence of the press and the civil society. And he should remember how he also affected the strategic silence and didn't object when the Moldovan authorities stopped the broadcast of not 1, not 5, not even 10, but 18 TV channels, 3 radio stations, and and blocked around 60 Russian and Russian-speaking Russian language information resources. Perhaps that's not of concern to distinguished representative. Perhaps he didn't even scratch himself when he thought about it. Perhaps that's another matter.
There can be no double standards. When it comes to double standards, it means that there are no at all. And we're coming to yet another conclusion. This is a biased position. Mr. Mazhaikas voiced the true reasons of the so-called concern in Chisinau in September 2024. before the elections, presidential elections, and this notorious referendum on the accession of the country as a member of the EU, one of the European projects, and he said back then, and we talked about this, the possibility to buy of agricultural lands of Moldova by the Western transnational companies, corporations. As you remember, this just made the news in the mass media in the West. By the way, even local authorities should safeguard the interests of its citizens, but then they put it as if nothing happened. But we know that he voiced the true reasons of his association towards Moldova. And in wrapping up this conclusion, in December 2024, when the Service of Foreign Intelligence of Russia announced and informed that Yanis Mazeiks required the Moldovan authorities under any pretext to bring to justice the leaders of opposition groups that advocate the mutually beneficial dialogue with Russia and dismiss the head of Gagauzia, Yevgenia Gutsul. They don't know what to do with her. In March, as you know, and we spoke about it today, she was detained at the Chisinau airport, and right now she's under home arrest. Now you see the EU democracy in practice. So we need to consider this, and the Moldovans should consider this as well. And I think this is a recognized fact and just a model of Brussels in terms of prompt change of the leaders and forgetting about the promises made. So unfortunately, they pursue such a practice. Hopefully, they won't destroy the statehood of Moldova and its culture, but nevertheless, we should be realist in this term. Thank you very much. Is Artsy Bolkan with us? Yes. Good afternoon. I don't hear you. Just a second. Good afternoon. Madam Zakharova, do you hear me? We have two questions today. The first, what are the expectations of Moscow on the new government of Serbia, which after the criticism of the European Union by Alexander Vučić, and my second question will come after my first one. I think that's a good pretext for the representatives of the European Union, including for those whom we talked about them just right now, to resent in terms of interference in domestic affairs of a sovereign state, and I'm talking about Serbia. This is the first point. And secondly, I would like to tell you that the truth that you already know. We will build a mutually beneficial cooperation with this country in the spirit of friendly and partnership relations for the interests of our peoples. But as for the root causes of Brussels' interference in domestic affairs, even up to forming the so-called cabinets in the Serbian government, you need to ask this question to Brussels itself. And we have the second question. What is the progress of talks and what can influence signing the new gas deal between Serbia and Russia? With due account that the current deal expires on the 31st of May. As you know, the new contacts on the contract on supplies of gas to Serbia is being conducted by the competent authorities of the both countries. I can clarify if you give me some list of specific issues, and it will be much easier for everyone to redirect your question to the experts concerned, and we can send you back their response. Thank you very much. Thank you. Is Xinhua with us? Good afternoon, Madam Zakharova. Good afternoon. Xinhua. We have a question. Recently in Beijing held a central meeting on the work with the neighboring countries, with China. It mentioned that in order to build a community with one faith, China is ready to cooperate in various areas. This is the strengthening of strategic mutual trust, establishing the network of interaction, joint ensuring of regional stability, expanded contacts and exchanges, facilitate people's movements, and so on. What is your comment? Do you believe that Russia and China, which are great neighbors to each other, should cooperate so that to maintain peace and development in the region and across the globe? You've had the reason that Russia and China are large neighbors, and I would like to add that the relations between our countries is an iconic model of mutually beneficial, equal, strategic cooperation of great powers in the modern world. I would add responsible international actors. The top leaders of our countries were wise enough and put an end to the once very sensitive issue, border issue, making it in place of eternal, as you say among your experts and our experts, the place of external peace and friendship handed over from generation to generation. This is a good phrase. I think it contains the real wiseness. The regions of the Far East and the northeast of China share multiple ties of practical cooperation, humanitarian exchanges, and in order to promote such cooperation, the relevant intergovernmental commission was being established and is functioning. Further steps to expand contacts are being manned, including the mutual visits of citizens. Our visa experts also work in this direction. I believe that is cross-border interaction. Russia and China are iconic good neighbors. This does not mean that we don't have any issues that are not to be resolved, but the matter is that we stand ready to resolve them on a mutually beneficial basis. We maintain friendly relations with all our border neighbors and the neighbors that border with China. That you talked about. What else can I say? Maybe I can mention a coordinated role carried out on the bilateral basis under international organizations, for example, under SCO, ASEAN, other trilaterate, and other formats. Moscow and Beijing are interested in ensuring security and stability of all our neighbors across the region. And I think that's the main goal of the SCO, establishing this role. We stand ready to support the social and economic development of our neighbors, and we do not tolerate destructive interference of extra-regional powers who are against Russia and China. We have elaborated a joint support to the regional issue on a number of areas. I'm not talking about the overall politics, but counteraction to the new challenges and threats. I'm talking about the whole track of issues where we have pragmatic and practical steps. And I believe that there is another important dimension for our cooperation in a more broader way. cooperation of Moscow and Beijing brings value and consolidates the position of the countries of the global South and East who are tired of the timeless dominance of the West that resembles the eternal neocolonial ideology, that want to have mutually beneficial cooperation, equal cooperation. So I believe that our countries play a significant role in this process, and I believe that there much is said about the new multiple world order, and our both states contribute to the formation of a more just global multipolar world order as an alternative to endless dictatorship of a restricted group of states who believe they are exceptionist and dictate their own will on others. Thank you very much. Is Reuters with us? Madam Zakharova, good afternoon. Good afternoon. Reuters is here, and we have a question. You were with us, and right now you are just here. Right here with you. I remember everything, as you know. I would like just to make some novelties. I'm for traditions, as you know. And my question relates to the previous interview of Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov to Kommersant journal, who said that it is not easy to find a solution, the key and the core areas of Ukrainian settlement. Can you please tell us what are the differences, to what extent the United States can recognize the settlement principles voiced by President of Russia, Vladimir Putin, on the 14th of June, and what is the suggestion of the US side? I think you just have a kind of a patchwork question. You started from the root differences. Don't you see our logic? Even if we don't touch upon the root causes of the conflict that need to be eliminated, even now, on the local track, the deals, the 30-day ceasefire deal highlights that the Kiev regime cannot comply with its obligations. And in his interview, our Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov dwelled into this component. I refer to that with due account of the complexity of the issue. All crazy things that evolved in this dimension, who forged young democracy in Ukraine. But without this key component, and I would like to say that exactly this component highlights the complicated nature of the agreements to be aligned. You are talking about the alignment parameters, but the Kiev regime that shows it cannot comply with any obligations, and it's just a fact. If you just study this specific episode, you would understand that this is the root problem in the conflict settlement. Let me remind you that soon after Washington's announcements on the ceasefire, Zelensky supported this idea, not as some third proposal, but as a potential, but including his potential involvement. He became a part of this ceasefire regime. But there was no day when they fulfill their obligations they signed by the person who always insists that he rules everything in Ukraine. They cannot stop hostilities even for 30 days. They do not keep up with their promises made to the whole international community. They should have withstood their promises. This is, once again, another example that any parameters to be aligned in the context of potential agreements must be implemented and fulfilled by the parties. And in this case, the Kiev regime shows that it cannot fulfill its obligations. Likewise, previously. But previously I said that they lied to the international community that they wanted to implement and to comply with the Minsk agreements. But right now they declared themselves to be a party of this ceasefire regime. But at the same time, they continue attacks. Now, as for the second part of your question about Washington, I think that Washington has its official representatives and experts that could speak for the official authority and add something on their behalf, but you should address these questions to them. But to be brief, currently we are dealing with a new administration. This is quite different administration compared to the previous one, which does not build on imposed ideology of globalists or biased experts, which tries, and I follow all their statements, tries to figure out itself in ins and outs, to look into the root causes, so that to shape their own vision on how to resolve the issue. These were statements by the head of the states, by Mr. Trump and his administration, and by all those who were appointed by him as representatives for international contacts in the context of the Ukrainian crisis. I would like to say settlement, but nevertheless it's still a crisis. This will have a long way to go, and be very careful and analyze the facts. We see that the current administration shows its intent to achieve the goal I've mentioned. Naturally, we have a long way to go. We have just made some minor steps. We're talking about some success and inform the public on it. We do not hide the gaps and the weak points we have. And I would like to remind you of the interview of Sergei Lavrov to Kommersant and his statements. We'll make links in the text of the text version of the brief. We continue our trustworthy contacts with the American side. We can see that our interlocutors become to hear us, and we believe that we can suggest that they started to perceive better some aspects and concerns of Russia, that we need to eliminate the root causes of the Ukrainian crisis. And that's what your question. And that was the statement of President Putin in this hall on the 14th of June, 2024.
Above all, we're talking about attempts to eradicate the Russian-speaking population of Ukraine and the military scope to draw Ukraine into NATO. Thank you very much for the response. Thank you. Is the Media Corporation of China? Yes. Remember that recently the United States introduced tariffs for the majority of countries of the world, and they gave 75 states they postponed the introduction of those tariffs for 75 countries of the world, and even later the Minister of Finance of the United States said that it was all temporary and all the goods will be subjected to tariffs. What are the key reasons, in your opinion, for such fluctuations in tariffs? In a couple of words, and I will be saying that they are trying to gain preferences. In 2 words, they are not even hiding to that. They, as we said in previous briefings, they are doing that in their own fashion. Each new administration or each new team that changes, in that case, they are doing this in that way. In Washington, once again, they don't hide it and don't consider themselves tied by the international trade obligations. They are not consider themselves bound by trade law. They are not bound by, as they say, the obligations within the WTO. They preferred unilateral tariff protectionism, and due to this protectionism, perhaps they desired to increase access of United States companies to foreign markets and thus gain investments to shift manufacturing to their own territory. This all emanates from their own statements, and the tariff barrier, in essence, is being used by the White House to force trade partners to accept the terms of the United States or to gain preferences, as already said. Any turmoil for the world economy that is clearly could lead to the lowering of demand and of development rates is obvious, perhaps to negatively influence the world processes. Russia, as a prominent exporter country and a responsible participant of the multilateral trade system, is interested in honest, open trade relations. Once again, we are standing for honesty and equal competition. It's obvious that the competition can't really be equal, but everyone should be bound by the same rules, since everyone's a participant of a singular space in which you have to have a civilized interaction with each other. And moreover, those rules for this common space have already been elaborated, and no one officially derogated them previously. That's why our country is standing against the use of any unilateral limitations in trades, such limitations as illegitimate sanctions, politicized and environmental climate demands, and other methods of competition that is negatively influencing the global trade and contradicts the obligations taken upon by states in the framework of relevant structures and organizations. So there is nothing illegal for a country, for example, saying that they would be withdrawing from some international structure in accordance with the existing procedures and rules and obligations. Well, but then one should leave that organization, but preserving preferences of being member of the organization and then claiming that they bear no responsibility or have no obligations towards members of these organizations, and that the country is not bound by any laws or obligations, that would be strange. Either you have a full-fledged membership, which includes both preferences and responsibilities, or you can say that the United States, for example, is no longer a member of the WTO. Thank you. Let's continue. I have a second question. That tomorrow we are starting the 5th Beijing International Film Festival. The Russian movie, The Prophet, the history of Alexander Pushkin, made part of the short list of the program. And What, in your opinion, is the factor in the success of the Chinese film industry in Russia, and how does this cultural exchange influences the film industry and culture in Russia and China? Our cooperation in the area of cinematography is one of the very important facets of the multi-pronged package of bilateral relations between our countries. Our film industry was always appreciated in China, perhaps with some lulls, with some pauses, with some brief periods of counter tendencies, but generally our films have been generally represented in China. But now our audience is also very interested in watching Chinese movies, and we've been familiar with many Chinese film directors and actors, and even before that. But now we are creating joint projects with China in that regard, and this direction is obviously one of the focuses of our leaders, and the peoples of our both countries should know each other better, considering that we are we're two largest countries neighboring each other. On the sidelines of the BRICS summit in Kazan, the heads of state especially mentioned the questions of the development of joint cinematography production. And to implement those agreements, we are currently conducting systemic work to further extend and enrich the relevant exchanges. In March this year, just recently, less than a month ago, the delegation of Russian cinematographers led by the Minister of Culture of the Russian Federation visited China. There was a round table with the specialists of two countries. There have been presentations of new creative projects. Russian representatives were able to visit the cinematography studios. They have harmonized the plan of actions on joint cinema production, which I hope will be signed soon. I think that the relevant agencies will be able to inform you in more detail on that, but we are sure that in that regard we have broad perspective for increasing our interaction. Once again, in our history we have good examples of such interaction, and I am sure that the prospects are even more important right now. For example, the Red Silk, the movie that recently premiered in February this year in Russia, and I think that was a veritable success. One more example is the annual film festival, which of course garners interest from the public in both our countries. Both our and Chinese movies are participating in different international film festivals on a regular basis. We are greatly happy to see that the Russian movie, The Prophet, story of Alexander Pushkin, received great attention and success, and wish success to the director and all the cast on the upcoming Beijing International Film Festival. We hope that there will be more showcases of Chinese movies in Moscow. April is usually rich with cultural events, so I would like to wish everyone to enjoy those movies. And at the state level, of course, we've enterprised to begin important amount of work. Thank you. Is news.ru with us? Yes, good afternoon. This week, the head of the Minister of Foreign Affairs for Armenia, Arat Mirzian, claimed that Armenia and Azerbaijan were never closer to peace than today. And the Minister, Sergei Lavrov, called for the implementation of the full scope of agreements between Russia, Azerbaijan, and Armenia reached in 2022, including the unblocking of communications. How could Moscow help carrying out those agreements? The complex of agreements on the highest level, that you mentioned, retains its relevance, and we mention it every week while responding to questions. And the speediest resumption of full-fledged interaction in a trilateral format would, of course, help sustainable peace and well-being in the South Caucasus. And we are ready to assist our Azerbaijani and Armenian partners on all key avenues regarding reconciliation of two countries. We had and we still have some good progress on the unblocking of transport and economic communications in the framework of the tripartite working group presided over by the Deputy Prime Ministers of Russia, Azerbaijan, and Armenia. We're ready to share our experience in delimitation and demarcation of border. Specialists in that area are recognized as one of the best in the post-Soviet space, and we also have cartography material, which is unique in resolving the accumulated humanitarian issues during that accumulated during the conflict. There's nothing new to say, but we are always happy to help our Azerbaijani and Armenian friends to go forward with the normalization of their relations. Thank you very much. Is Bold News with us? Yes, good afternoon. You already responded well to our question regarding Estonia's intention to sink ships, so that's it for my question. Is Al Mayadin with us? Is Baku TV with us? Yes, we are here. Good afternoon. I have one question today that the Prime Minister of Armenia, Nikol Pashinyan, giving a statement in the parliament on Tuesday, called for the dissolution of the Minsk group of the OSCE, according with the demand of the Azerbaijani side. How does Moscow evaluate the readiness, such readiness from Armenian leader? What do you think is possible to be done to sign the peace treaty as soon as possible? You know, I will just remind you, we've been mentioning this on numerous occasions, that with cessation of communications from the United States and French co-chairs of the Minsk Group in February 22, and with the recognition of Armenia for Karabakh to be an intrinsic part of Azerbaijan Republic as a result of the Armenia-Azerbaijan EU-France summit in Prague on 6 October 2022, and reversal situation on the ground in September 2023, and the mandate of the OSCE approved in the same time. The mandate of the OSCE representative of the Minsk conference has lost its relevance. As a result of this, all the structures of the Minsk conference, the Minsk group, the group of high-level planning, and the position of the personal representative of the acting chair of the OSCE regarding the Nagorno-Karabakh settlement, this is all subject to dissolution right now. I think that the optimal way to adopt a corresponding decision in that regard is the joint proposition of Baku and Yerevan to eliminate the corresponding institutions. On our side, we are ready to continue assisting our partners in overcoming the remaining obstacles to get the peace treaty signed, and also in the blocking of transport and economic communications, delimitation of the border, and the resolution of the humanitarian issues based on the measures that have been taken previously. Everything that I've already said before. And of course, we are always ready to confirm our readiness to provide the Russian platform for negotiations of representatives of Azerbaijan and Armenia on the entire spectrum of bilateral questions, including the conclusion of the peace treaty. Thank you very much. Thank you. Is Moscow Post with us? Yes. We have one question today, but it's quite large in volume. The head of the delegation of the Russian Federation at the Vienna negotiations on issues of military security and arms control at interim, Yulia Zhanova, mentioned that the Western coalition containing 50 states is completely supporting the Kiev Nazis in that, and with that group it would be very difficult to build constructive relations while discussing at the OSCE forum on the cooperation in on security measures. It would, as stated by the head of the delegation. And what is the usefulness of this forum, and how do you evaluate the current process of Helsinki process that was launched during the USSR under the influence of the outcomes of the Second World War? After the dismantlement of the Russia-NATO Council, this forum at the OSCE remained one of the singular channels of multilateral multi-political context between the countries in the collective West. It's very important that the work with the forum is being conducted with the equal participation of all state parties and based off the principle of consensus, which is a key principle for the OSCE. It means that no one can impose an unacceptable decision upon Russia or just ignore our opinion. Last year, the Danish chairpersonship of the forum, with this Russophobic onslaught, tried to violate this principle, but this attempt was thwarted by the Russian Federation. We have to state that the remilitarization of the western part of Europe and this aggressive rhetoric that is being imposed to the popular conscience in the NATO countries and the European Union is negatively influencing the forum and its work. We see how the Westerners are trying in earnest to obstruct the implementation of its mandate. And the mandate, as I remind you, is to ensure security and stability through negotiations on exact measures, confidence-building measures. And in practice, we see that the Western Europe is going into a diametrically opposite direction. Militarization, destruction of trust, breaking up of any mechanisms guaranteeing security. This is a process that leads to an abyss. Other than that, the French, the Canadians, the Poles, the Baltic states, and other radicals are trying to use this forum as a platform to have a hybrid opposition to our country. We are talking about misinformation and different other tricks up their sleeve. We are trying to disavow such approaches. We use this platform to spread truth based on facts, on verifiable information. And in the last 3 years, the OSCE Forum witnessed the publication of around 100 reports regarding the real situation in the area of the special military operation from our side. We also present reports on the war crimes of the Kiev regime with assistance of Western mentors, including in the Kursk region. We are trying to have them open their eyes and witness the truth, however damaging it would be for them. We see how there is oppression of media sources in the Western countries, even their own proprietary media. There are no trusted sources of information in the region, only the mainstream news and the official statements. We have repeatedly mentioned the deep crisis that the OSCE generally experiences right now. I would like to remind you of the statement of Minister of Foreign Affairs, Mr. Lavrov, during the Council of Ministers of this organization recently. The current situation in the organization is characterized by the maniacal desire of the Western countries to subject this Vienna platform to their own interest. There is an element of attempts to privatize the pressure instruments. We have seen it all.
In the framework of this frenzy idea, of course, the most horrible thing we are witnessing not some political interests and distancing from the OSCE principles and disrespect for the main mechanisms at the core of this organization. We are witnessing the processes within the OSCE. That's because in order to contract to which it was established, I'm talking about the glorification of Nazism, neo-Nazist sentiments. The West is trying to revise the results of the Second World War to minimize the contribution of our country to victory, to whitewash the Nazi criminals. The OSCE did not oppose to it, but with its inaction, it even pours water on the meal of all those who are doing so. The West decided to forget about the tragic lessons of the history, and unless the NATO and EU countries abandon their geopolitical games, the organization that was established by de facto the victory over Nazism by the Helsinki process, and that's the principle that made the international community establish the organization. Unless all these work as it should work, along with this organization charter, there won't be any future for this organization. We need to preserve not in the form and the shape of this organization, but I'm talking of the terms and the content and the functions of this organization. Is Vestnik Kavkaza with us? Good afternoon, Madam Zakharova. The Foreign Minister of France, Jean-Michel Moreau, hoped that the EU mission in Armenia will expand, which sees and eases tensions in Caucasus. What is Russia's attitude towards the French mission in Armenia? We've talked about this as well. There are all concerns to say that the French are interested in maintaining regional tensions in order to achieve their own geopolitical goals. We are not deluding ourselves as for we are being assured of the good intentions of Paris in the Caucasus. And this trip has nothing to do with the process of de-escalation or normalization of peace building or peacekeeping process. We have seen the attempts of Paris to enforce mediation efforts in order through aggravation of the Armenian-Azerbaijani conflict. It's the French who are responsible for the undermining the work and dismantling of the OSCE mission. What is the main goal? We are quite aware of it. It has nothing to do with the tasks to normalize the situation between Yerevan and Baku. We can call them, and I mean the EU, as monitors and spies. And they are working with all the countries against all neighboring countries to Armenia. It was mentioned by many regional players. And the information that Paris gathers and collects in the region, they do not share it with the Armenian side because they have quite the opposite objective. They submit all this information directly to Brussels so that Brussels can consolidate its position in the former area of influence of the Soviet Union. As we know that EU and France are planning to extend its mandate in order to, by all means, to consolidate its stance in the South Caucasus, squeezing in between non-regional players so that the destiny was decided not by the countries a part of this region, especially taking into account that they have their own experience, to dictate their own will. Of course, they are called as a NATO mission. Of course, they are not called themselves as a headquarters, but these are NATO countries, de facto. The observers do not bring any stability to the region. We record messages on gunshot in the Armeno-Azerbaijani border. And this is another confirmation that extra-regional activity, irrespective of France or the European Union, does not bring peace to South Caucasus. Moreover, it creates dividing lines and hotbeds of tension. Of course, it's up to sovereign Armenia to choose external partners and the parameters of national security. But I believe that everyone understands that South Caucasus is seen by the European Union as another front to unleash hybrid war, global hybrid war, against everyone, I think. Dragging Armenia into the influence of the collective West with some blurred perspectives, France tries to undermine the historic Russo-Armenian ties that have always been for the benefit of the peoples of our countries. Back in the future, just for one state, and now for different states, I mean Armenia and Russia, is in the interests of aspiration. Whether it is in the interests of the Armenians themselves, I believe no. Here it's about NATO, not the European Union. No benefit for Armenia in this alliance, because we can check it, because you can't wait nothing good. You can't wait anything good from NATO. Thank you very much. Is Newsfront with us? Yes, good afternoon, Madam Zakharova. The probable future Chancellor of Germany, Friedrich Merz, called the Kiev regime to change its strategy in the conflict with Russia, switching to counteroffense. And one of the key ideas for attacks of the Ukrainian army, he indicated the Crimean Bridge in the interview to ARD channel. What is the ministry's comment on such a statement and indication to make attacks on the Crimea on behalf of Germany? I think it's a bizarre statement. Maybe a year ago I would say that it's bizarre because it's beyond values, moral values, because it's just a kind of terrorist logic, because it's an extremism. It's all about the repetition of the faults and errors. Right now I would say just another thing. I think that right now you cannot demand and require from the citizens of Ukraine any offensive. Everyone understood the disaster of the Ukrainian army. And that's why they are attacking, deliberately attacking civilian infrastructure, civilians, because they don't have any other choice with counteroffensive. Because this counteroffensive led to massacres of the Ukrainian citizens who were forcibly mobilized by Zelensky regime. And against this backdrop, there is one sponsor of this slaughter of our brothers, Slavic brothers, and I'm talking about Germany. It's one of historic sponsors, by the way. And once again, we see how they're trying to raise and to encourage this ill body to make a counteroffensive. You just need to have a look at all these war prisoners of Armenia. We treat them, we nourish them, and then the Ukrainian army and the soldiers captivated and held in prison tell how they were treated in the Ukrainian army as a kind of subhumans. I know that the leader of Germany should have fixed the following, that without aid of the military of Germany. This combat with the cruise missiles is impossible. Any attacks on the Russian energy infrastructure, critical infrastructure, as you mentioned, and Merz indicated exactly the Crimean Bridge, that would be considered as a direct involvement of Germany on the side of the Ukrainian regime with all its repercussions for Germany. Although that we can speak on the side of Kiev regime because it's not a side, but it's just a tool in this Western manipulation and this Western war. Thank you. Is Голос Отечества with us? Good afternoon, Madam Zakharova. We are with you. Good afternoon. We've heard your question to the answer to the question about the interview of Mr. Lavrov, that Russia and US has not aligned the security parameters on the Ukrainian crisis. We would like to ask another question as for the parameters. Before the decision of the court issues the legitimacy, we cannot reach any agreement because there are no legitimate powers with which we can make agreement. How can you comment on this impasse? We don't know anything that anyone appealed to the court asking to cancel the independence of former Soviet republics, and that would be have some legal laws as a processes. So I believe that your question is quite blurred. Of course, there is a suit that more than 6,000 citizens of our... You were talking about prosecutions. No, it has not been initiated. So I cannot answer your question because there are no initiations, because you're talking about the court proceedings. Thank you. Is author E with us? Goodbye. Good afternoon, Ruslan Pankratov, author E. You have answered the first question in a detailed way. I'm talking about the threats of Kaja Kallas and all her reflections in her mind. But the next news is very thrilling as well. The Apostolos in Ukraine, Archbishop Visvaldas Kulbokas, declared, and I quote, on the 13th of April, the Russian army shelled Sumy on the Palm Sunday, and the Ukrainian city Sumy went to churches to pray. This missile shelling claimed lives of 30 people exactly at the time when they went to pray, because this was the attack just in the downtown of the city. And this is the end of the quote. We know that this attack was made on the military infrastructure, claiming lives more than 30 mercenaries, foreign mercenaries and instructors. How can you comment this? Because the so-called Holy See and the Apostolos are actively participating in this propaganda campaign on behalf of Ukraine, just forging this agenda, anti-Russia agenda. You just answered your own question with a phrase that the Minister of Defense have already made a statement, and you know it, that on the 13th of April, the Russian army shelled the gathering of the command staff of the group of Ukrainian army in Sumy. Dozens of military officers and soldiers were killed, and you can see the numbers revealed by the Defense Ministry. I also talked about today that all that we hear from the Western mass media and their activists in international organizations, shortly after the attack of Russia on this gathering, this is another staging, which builds on lies and hypocrisy, distortions of reality. Naturally, We are witnessing this on many occasions, contrary to the common mind, common sense, not to mention about some moral values. They continue to use human beings as a human shield to cover up Zelensky and his patrons. Then they use these people as a pretext to blame Russia. We are seeing this starting long before. By the way, the real facts, for example, the fact which the West decided to build upon in assessing the second Maidan coup d'etat in 2014, who shelled the peaceful protesters. And the West doesn't say a word about this, but the EU said back then that was a shooter on behalf of the Ukrainian regime who opened fire on the civilians. But the most important is that inside the Ukrainian society, as I've said, irrespective of the political views and preferences, after this atrocity by Zelensky and his accomplices, the public started to decide whether it is possible or not, and who is responsible for this, who planned to use civilians, women and children, to clearly make another staging, blaming Russia and submit these accuses to Washington as de facto material of violence by Russia of all reasonable promises and agreements. And you see these harsh debates in the Ukrainian society. There is an outrage. They're trying to find all those who are to blame. How it came out that in the downtown of the densely populated city on this Orthodox holiday, the Palm Sunday, there were staged events with the participation of many military men. And the public poses this question. And why this event engaged women and children, people, voices an outcry. The former declarations of the apostles in Ukraine, and he is a very biased personality, and we know it, they are deplorably frustrating, taking into account the attitude of Pope Francis, who showed the understanding of the root causes of the current conflict and expressed readiness to support through diplomatic means the settlement, not to fan the situation, but to smoothen the situation. Previously, there was a telephone conversation between the Holy See and the Foreign Ministry, during which the Ukrainian crisis was discussed and the prospects of its resolution on the basis of the approaches of the Russian Federation, as well as confirmed the interest to continue a meaningful dialogue. And instead of stating some biased and unjustified statements that contradict the current political policy of the Holy See, in order to cater for this Kulbokas, he should have focus on important tasks that truly in line with his diplomatic mission in Kyiv. For example, it's not my task to lecture him. I think that he has curators from official Holy See who tell him how to work. But in general, if he comes up to us with his opinion, that's a good opportunity to answer back with recommendations. For example, he can conduct pastoral work with the Ukrainian authorities, so to convince them to respect the ceasefire under which they signed. I'm talking about Zelensky.
Well, for example, he could work with the Kiev regime so that it could stop the daily mass attacks against the civilian infrastructure in Russia, or try to reach the Kiev regime for them to abrogate their self-imposed ban on negotiations with Russia. I think he has different facets of his activity that directly pertains to the competences of Papal Nuncio in Ukraine, but we see overwhelming cynicism with which the Kiev regime is attacking and destroying the Ukrainian Orthodox Church. That's where the representative of Christian denomination, Christian family, could find use for himself, so that he is witnessing firsthand how the Ukrainian Orthodox Church is being destroyed, how parishes are being destroyed, how the parishioners are not just suffering morally, but they're being persecuted physically, including repressions and even killings. He is able to see the desecration before the rise of the international community, desecration of Ukrainian holy sites and Christian holy sites in Ukraine. So the entire Christianity is being harmed. That's just a brief list of things that he could do in his free time, and not even in free time, his work time too. Thank you very much. Is Vesti with us? Perhaps no. Is Al-Mayadin with us? I should clarify. Is Al-Mayadin with us? If not, we will be responding specific. Yes. Good afternoon. Natalia Kapanenko, Vesti. I just wanted to go on with the Christian topic. Now into a different region. As you know, there's a conflict in the Middle East. Our readers and concerned public is concerned about the situation about the holy sites in the Middle East, and what is the situation with the holy sites in the Middle East, how secure are they? You know that the aggravation of the military political situation in the whole range of countries of the Middle East and the sharp escalation of the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, together with aggravating social-economic problems, of course, negatively influences the situation of the different denominations groups, including quite numerous Christians community in the region. There are a lot of people espousing Christianity in the region, and of course we're especially worried about the situation in the Holy Land, where there are a lot of sacred places in the Middle East. We're talking about the territories of Israel, Palestine, Jordan, Syria, and Lebanon. Both the Russian MFA and the Russian Orthodox Church are maintaining close contact with local authorities and the authorities leading the Christian communities to provide necessary support to the Christian population of the Middle East, including when it comes to the restoration of churches, schools, and other religious facilities that have been damaged as a result of the military activity. We are helping Middle East Christians also through the Emperor's Orthodox Palestinian Society, and the Rosatom created the Foundation of Support of Christian Culture and Heritage, and other Russian NGOs and religious cultural communities. There is active work on that track, namely on the restoration of the Jerusalem heritage, and our citizens are sending humanitarian aid and financially supporting the local communities, and of course there's more support, and of course they are praying for them. Thank you very much. Just once again, I just wanted to clarify, Al-Mayadin, are you with us right now? If not, we will be responding to you directly. Thank you very much. Until we meet again, and I wish you all the best. Thank you.